Hey there, my name is Desmond, one of the managers here at the Entrepreneurship Center right here in Chiang, Thailand. Thank you so much for joining us today on this training video. What we're going to learn in this video is we're going to learn how to fight a chargeback and more importantly, how to win a chargeback. A chargeback is a forced transaction reversal that is issued by a cardholder's bank. Think about back to a time where you may have been either unhappy with a service or you didn't recognize a transaction on your statement or you needed money and you just called your bank and said, you know what, I'm going to file a dispute because I know they'll give me a temporary credit, right? Most of us have done that, and that's a statistical fact. Do you know that there's billions and billions and billions of disputes and chargebacks just in the US alone every single year, and on average, each individual person has normally done at least 1 to 2 chargebacks, maybe even 3 or 4 per year. Now, with all of that said, you know, it's not a pleasant situation, right, when someone calls and files a dispute, but here's how it goes. The consumer wants to dispute the transaction. When they look at their statement, they call their bank and they say, hey, I want to file a dispute. Then the bank is going to ask them, okay, well, what's the merchant's name, the date, and the amount? Then they're going to give them that information. Then, you know, the bank representative, the dispute department is going to ask a series of questions. Hey, did you authorize this? Do you know this merchant? Have you ever reached out to them to see if you can get this corrected without getting us involved? Boom, boom, boom. Standard script stuff, right? Then after you go through that process, they are going to, you know, issue you the award on the dispute, and normally with most of the big banks, issue you a temporary credit. Now, that's what you see on the front end as a consumer. That's what your consumer is going to see. On the back end, especially if you're a business owner and you're already in revenue, what you already know about this process is that you're immediately going to be notified and they're taking the money straight out of your account automatically. You must remember, as a business owner, you are guilty until you're proven innocent, which is really unfortunate, but that's the way it goes. And I guess they grab the money so that they can afford and not take too much of a risk to be able to give the temporary credit line back to the consumer because, you know, at the end of the day, they're doing business with that person and they're not doing business with you, so their loyalty is with them. Now, here's the steps in which you should actually follow to fight and win a chargeback. Number 1, determine the reason code. Or determine the reason and understand reason codes, actually. So the reason is just, you know, what made that person actually want to call their bank and file a dispute. Well, oftentimes it could be, you know, fraud. Hey, I never authorized this. I don't know what this is. I'm not paying for it, right? That's essentially fraud. Number 2 is, hey, I received the product, but the product is not working as advertised. You know, number 3 could be the transaction is just not recognized, right? So like, you know, there's been some scenarios, and I've had this happen before, where we had a company and we were doing business as a different name than our government registered name, right? And this is, even with companies like Stripe, they always say, put, you know, the best descriptor on the statement. That's called a descriptor. It's the words that go on your client's merchant account or bank account statement when they see the transaction. So if you ever bought something from like a McDonald's or a Walmart, etc., oftentimes they're going to have the name on your statement. Well, that's called a descriptor in the electronic payment world. Now, you want to have the appropriate descriptor because you could very easily run into a situation where someone doesn't recognize a transaction, even though they may love your business, but they did business with the marketing name, not knowing that they were really doing business with the government registered entity. So sometimes that can create you know, some issues. Now, one other thing that we're going to want to understand as well about how payments work in general is that, you know, you have an issuing bank, which could be Chase or Wells Fargo or Bangkok Bank or Capricorn Bank here in Thailand, doesn't matter. And then you have a receiving bank, which could also be any one of those banks. Any one of those banks, depending on what the scenario is, could be one or the other at a time. Now, the way that they are actually moving money to one another, especially with electronic payments and debit and credit cards, is through something called a payment network or a payment interchange. Now, if you think about transportation, you know, how do we get around when we drive around our city, our state, our country? We use roads and we use highways. So if you think about, okay, if I'm in one city, I'm going to another city, think about the cities as banks and think about Visa, MasterCard, and Union Pay and other payment networks like that are not banks. Think about them as the highways, expressways, and the roads that actually are connecting the data from one city or one bank to another. That's, you know, kind of what's happening when you see, like, okay, you've got a card with a Visa, you know, MasterCard, Union Pay, you know, what do they call that? Diners Club or something like that. All those are payment networks, and each of those is sending a reason and a reason code to the receiving bank to then present to you. So when you get the chargeback, you must understand if you must make an agreement decision. You must understand, okay, do I agree with what this dispute is? Do I agree that maybe when I sent them the product it was maybe defective? Do I agree that okay they didn't use the service actually, right? If you agree, do nothing. Just make sure that you don't allow too many chargebacks where you go without disputing them, because that's going to increase your chargeback ratio. Normally you want to stay below like 2%, but really like 1% if you can, because if you go above that, then your merchant processing account is actually going to start taking a more detailed look at your account to make sure that there's nothing crazy going on. They're going to try to understand, okay, is this a high risk account that we approved, or is this just a something one-off scenario that happened? You just don't want to flag your account and potentially put it at risk of being shut down. So keep your ratio under 2%, ideally under 1%. So you want to make that agreement decision. Number 3, you want to craft a response. There's 3 critical things you must understand in crafting a response. Number 1, don't get emotional. Very easy when money is just taken out of your account and you're not expecting it, especially if money is kind of low a little bit. Every business has areas and days and weeks or times of the year where money's good, cash flow's good, money's not so good in the bank account, right? So it even hurts more when it comes out in a time that's not so good. And then what happens is you get angry, you're worried, you get anxious and all that. You have to suppress those emotions when you're going to craft a response. Here's why. Because those emotions oftentimes aren't going to be good, and it's going to come off as you being angry and upset and name calling, and it's not going to project a good professional image of you to the judge and jury. The judge and jury is the person in the dispute department at that bank, or actually either at that bank or at the merchant processing company, that is going to determine whether you win the chargeback or not. And you must remember this, and here's what no one talks about. Most of the people that are reviewing chargebacks have normally never started a business, so they're always going to be on the side of a consumer because they're going to put themselves in the shoe of the person doing the dispute, versus putting themselves in your shoes as a business owner and understanding your struggles and understanding that, hey, consumers lie too. They're not going to understand that. So don't get emotional. Number 2, always be polite. So when you're referring or referencing the person who did the chargeback, call them Mr. or Mrs. and refer to them by their last name. The same way that you would do that if they were a customer that you're happy with, right? You want to show them the utmost respect because, again, the judge and the jury is the person who's going to be making a decision in that dispute department, and they normally have been a consumer their whole life, right? The third thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to do one thing. Understand the reason and disprove that reason. So if the reason code was 83, for example, and they said it was fraud, that basically means that, hey, I never authorized this. I don't know who this company is. I'm not paying for it. All you have to show is that they knew who you were, they authorized it, and they used the service. And that's that. Oftentimes because we let our emotions get involved, a chargeback that could be like that big, like a paragraph maybe, ends up being that big because our emotions are getting into it. So just keep the emotions out of it, disprove the reason or the reason code, and you're gold. Now, step number 4 is find supporting materials. It's always great to have additional supporting materials that will support your claims of disproving and showing that their dispute was inaccurate or unjustified. So those different materials could come in the form of documents or screenshots, right? So it could be a contract that was signed, where they said, hey, yes, I'm going to do business with you, and it could show your refund policy or lack of refund policy, right? It could be a timestamp that shows usage of your service. It could be a certified mail note showing that, hey, on December 13th at 3 p.m., this person actually did receive the product, and they're saying they didn't receive the product, but I have proof, right? So you want to attach those things. That's number 4, supporting materials. And then number 5 is just submit the package to the merchant processor and then just wait a few days for the decision. Now, you're probably not going to win all of them, but I guarantee if you implement this method, which is number 1, determine the reason code. Number 2, determine if you agree or not. If you disagree, move forward. Craft a non-emotional response that refers to the consumer disputing respectfully and only dispute the reason code only. attach the supporting materials, and then send to the processor, and you should probably have above an 80% win rate on chargebacks. Trust me, I know, because I used to lose them and then now I win chargebacks, right? And so no one wants to deal with that, but it is an essential part of business, right? If you provided a service or a product to a consumer, you know, just like people say businesses lie, consumers do as well. Or sometimes consumers also do, have strong arguments, and they are correct, right? So you have to make that decision here, and we want to make sure you're making a moral, ethical, and legal decision here. It's very important. But if you really do disagree, and you know in your heart you served them as best as you could, and they're still trying to get the money back, you got to execute this process and win that revenue back. Because remember, you've got yourself, you've got your monthly expenses, and you've got the expenses of other people that you pay. You must have that money disposable to keep that business going. So my name is Desmond, one of the managers here at the Entrepreneurship Center, and I really appreciate your time in watching this video today on how to fight a chargeback. See you soon.